have a radical agenda at the moment. So if I take the cluster of care, Oxfam, let's say ActionAid as well, CRS, World Vision, and so on. But if I see Greenpeace and Amnesty International or Transparency International, I don't know, Transparency maybe a little bit less. This is not being recorded, yeah? Although I am outside, I couldn't say this while I was the Chief Executive of ActionAid because they were my peer and I have to respect them as well. But if you see that, then there is a much more going on in Amnesty and Greenpeace for all sorts of reasons, because they have taken the agenda now for which they have to do a big change. So economic, social, cultural rights in Amnesty and for Greenpeace, coming back to the earth from the sea is a big change. But in development, no, and it continues to be dominated. I mean, I think, and ActionAid in mine, and me included, we're constantly so worried about existential issues of fundraising that certain things goes to a certain place and it gets shut down because fundraising is not happening. For the last 10 years, also there hasn't been, humanitarian critiques have come, and I think it will come again, as I said, in the anniversary of Haiti's humanitarian action. But development NGOs haven't come under any scrutiny. I mean, your leadership research is probably will be the one more broad-based, and I don't know how critical that will be, but at least there will be more information. So this sector has been fairly left to its own devices in the last 10 years, for sure. There is a need for converging. Internally, in some organizations, leaderships are changing because these organizations also hold, and in the US more than other places, also a long-term leadership of some of these organizations. And there has been reasonable turnover of leadership in the last few years. So I am hopeful, but it's not going to happen. I believe that this kind of radical conversation do not happen without external mediation, whether that's by a donor or an academic or a journalist. I don't know, somebody will have to trigger it. But it's not happening.
But Ramesh, I don't know that you do a few big NGOs enough justice actually in your response, including ActionAid, because what John was asking, are there changes in the deliberative space and the types of leadership, the background of leadership, variation, diversity, etc. I mean, if you think the example of ActionAid, everything that you oversaw in the last 6 years about internationalization, where you have full national affiliates, right? So let's say ActionAid Sierra Leone with their own national boards, and you have an assembly of membership with elections, etc. And you have a requirement, I think, for having X number of poor people in national as well as international boards being represented, etc. Aren't those examples of the kinds of change that John was asking for?
Sure, but there are very few. I didn't want to bring ActionAid for obvious reasons here. But yeah, I mean, in the development sector, that's not happening that
not
much.
Broadly,
not broadly across the board. But Amnesty is very democratic but
they're membership based.
Yeah, but only 4% of Amnesty's members outside North America and Europe. And that means a different conversation will happen there. So I think everybody is in change mode, and I do feel that academics could trigger something. There's a time, it's 10 years gone, 10, 12 years. The Millennium Development Goal conversation will be stale very soon. So there is a sort of there is an opportunity, is what I see, for a next generation conversation.
Well, that would, to me, be very interesting to be involved in. Yes, please. And then Patrick.
Well, thank you very much, Professor. Okay, I got two short questions. First, when I was teaching in my country, I got a comment from one of my students. I think he was from Kenya or Nigeria. I asked him that whether they trust or whether they welcome those international NGOs. I very much, surprised that those local people, unfortunately, they don't trust those international NGOs. I will ask what was the problems, maybe those programs such as empowering women, maybe conflict their cultural values in local people. Maybe local people somehow they don't trust those international NGOs. I will ask why. And the second question, maybe depending on the first one, there are some governance problems in especially the big NGOs. For Greenpeace maybe, and the democratic governance problems. And these governance problems are eroding legitimacy of NGOs, I think. So what can be done, right? How this problem can be addressed? All right, thank you very much.
As I said, international NGOs generally, and because as a sector, is not trusted or liked, I would say, more than trusted by national NGO, mainly because of power relations, in my opinion. But it is true, there are international NGOs, they are good, bad and ugly, all of them. To give you an example, there was a country director of an international NGO in my country, and I used to work there. They discovered that he had a full-blown radio station in his home, in one of the rooms, and he was broadcasting to Tibet. So we neighbor Tibet. Yeah, Tibet is our neighboring country or province. So I think there are bad NGOs as well. Those who only search around for money, they steal your stuff, they bid against you, and so on. So I think, but there are good ones as well who actually stay there in good times and bad times, and actually support growth and development of that. But the sectoral thing is more to do with some of these aberrations, but also power relations. It's like nobody likes United States, but they can't do without it. Or for a Nepali, we can't do without Indians, but we like to dislike them as well. Otherwise, you will not know the difference. I think a little bit to do with the natural power relationship. But if you go deeper, then there is a very good relationship between international NGO and national NGO in some cases, but in other cases competitive. So it's a very wide range of relationship. But I did say that we could be better.
Maybe just related to this question. Are you talking about the people or the national NGOs? You're talking more generally about the people, right?
People, local people, right?
I mean, I was curious from that. I don't know, when you're working in countries whether you actually have perception data at your disposal about whether or not people in Mozambique or wherever actually appreciate the services that are being offered by a particular NGO, international NGO, or the sector as a whole. I mean, it comes up in classes here all the time. If I go up in a room, any Indians in the crowd, I don't know, and we just talk about generally what an Indian government official thinks about an NGO, it's 9 times out of 10 very negative.
There's only one data that annual survey, the trust survey. What's the name of that?
Charitable trust.
All the
World Values Survey.
There are 2 or 3 of those kinds.
Yeah,
and if you look at those annual one, you will always find NGO rate higher, consistently for many years so far.
Right.
Higher than corporation, higher than politician, lower than police. So I think that's the NGO's hanging ground. But I feel there is in the society generally, if you look, and especially middle class informed, they have an aversion to NGOs, international or not, because if in Nepal, NGOs are called by middle class informed people who are not in NGO sector as dollar farmers. Simply because they have become part of the dollar farming, which is the aid industry. So, but there are others. So, a forestry users group, community forestry users group, has a national association built from all villages and forests in Nepal. They will not be called dollar forests because they have a constituency, they elect, and so on. So, I think the national NGOs are. International NGOs are called foreign, and as soon as you say foreign, there is an element of mistrust inherent in it. The national NGOs are because they are paid much more than government, even national NGO, let alone international NGO. So there is a lifestyle contradictions which also is very. So with the general public, particularly in the urban settings, NGOs are not popular in any country. And then when you go deep into the villages and people that they are working with, and that's the saving grace. I believe that either people are happy because they are getting something in the material terms, or they feel that somebody is. So if you were to go to the sex workers collectives in Chennai, and talk to them, they appreciate that. At least somebody visits them and treats them as a normal human being and go and talk to them. You know. Then children in the street will appreciate that. Somebody will stand up for them.
So what you're saying is people who are affected by the services or advocacy, etc., will generally have a more positive.
Absolutely, because they are either benefiting or part of it. The others are not don't trust them, but for the lion's share of their burden for this must go to the NGOs themselves, because either they behave differently because of their lifestyle, motorbikes and all that, or because they don't communicate properly, or because their governance system. So you know, governance system is a very good point. A national governance system, and this is my working governance of NGOs in the southern hemisphere or developing country. The standards are very poor. If anything, they are either owned. They are not governed. They are owned, as you know. Wife will be the treasurer, and husband will be the executive director, and somebody else will be the chair, and they don't change. So NGOs are in our part of the world are owned as opposed to governed, and that is not without a problem. And that's why, you know, the relationship with the general society is bad as well. So there are lots of reasons. But the governance of the international NGOs, I think the governance of the international, this is one area where international NGOs have made big progress. Either internationalizing, federalizing, confederalizing governance, or bringing in governance more, not only women, because until 15, 20 years ago, I think they used to be mostly middle-class white men in most of this board. So I think there is a gender, proportionate gender balance in most boards, I think. As well as they have started to bring in people from Africa and Asia and Latin America as people who are being affected by or are closer to the work as well. So most boards have at least one person, however token that may be. No?
That's very token. Yeah,
very token. But that's increasing. But I think it's in the right direction. But the overall governance standard of the international NGOs, except for participation of the primary stakeholders, are very good, because the legislation is very, very strong in the countries in here or in there, almost too strong perhaps in some cases, for holding the board and governance accountable. Because you know, the accountability of the boards in India or Nepal or Bangladesh is virtually non-existent.
Okay, Patrick, let's have two more questions and then let's bring it to it.
Yeah. My question for you, you mentioned that there's good NGOs and there's bad NGOs, and I've seen it too. There's better USAID contractors and some not so good ones. And as governments cut back on their aid donations and private individuals cut back because of the global financial crisis, do you see more of the business side of the private business side coming into help revamp NGOs as showing that they're actually performing and showing that, wow, we've actually made a difference in these people's lives. We've taken the money that you investors or you shareholders have given us, and we've actually made a difference with that money. I mean, this is going to be, as you mentioned, it's going to be really bad in about 2 months when Haiti's anniversary comes up, because there's been a lot of mismanagement on the parts of NGOs. And you know, working on I worked for the last 2 years for a USAID for-profit development company. And one of the benefits that we had is that we got audited. And my job was to hire people that had been working for not only NGOs in the past, and they would mention to me almost all the time, whether they be locals in developing countries or whether they be Americans, how easy it was to hide bribes by the systems that these non-for-profit NGOs had. And it's much harder to do that with a for-profit development company. Now, there's other benefits that NGOs have, of course, as far as implementation. But do you see that more of these kind of for-profit systems will be put in place because there are different ways to show value?
Absolutely. I think there will be a push for social enterprise or having a much more business-oriented organizations who will, having said that, I'm not saying corruption is not the monopoly of NGOs or business only, because that's sort of more reflection of society than any particular types of organization. So I believe that there will be, I don't think the